Hello, Internet. Welcome to Kong Builders. Today's Wednesday, and meaning that we will have some good time here. So, hope you see us and hear us well. Just write down in the comments where you're coming from. If you're coming from LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitch, wherever you're watching us, Twitter, maybe even Twitter. If you have a Twitter, you can go and follow me on Twitter as well. My name is Viktor Gamov, as always, today. But today I have a special guest for you. I'm just reminding you that we're doing this hackathon session, special episodes where we're gonna teach you some of the Kong ways so you can build something around the Kong. And today I'm super excited. If my boot button will be working, I will have my friend Thijs. I'm not gonna butcher his last name because he will pronounce it, and whoever will pronounce the way he will like the most will get a t-shirt from us. Thijs, welcome to Kong Builders.
Hey, thanks, Victor. Great to be here. Yeah, my name, as Victor said, go into the competition to win a t-shirt and try to pronounce Thijs Schreijer.
Thijs coming to us from across the ocean, and we use this opportunity to when the people joining this live stream, they are sharing the where they're coming from, where their location, where they're based off, and where are we coming from to us, Thijs, this morning? At least morning for me and the morning for California, but it's like late afternoon for you, I guess.
Yeah, the Netherlands in this case. So yeah, let's say Amsterdam, not exactly in Amsterdam, but near Amsterdam. The Netherlands is such a small country that everybody lives in Amsterdam pretty much. So
Pretty much everyone lives in Amsterdam. Can you just for the conversation started and to set the context, what you're going to be doing this? What are you doing at Kong? Remember this movie Office Spaces when they were doing interview and like, how you can describe what you do here? And you should respond like, I'm good with people. How you cannot understand this? I'm good with people.
oh man, I'm exceptionally good with people. I'm the best with people. That's bad these days to say that, but I'm holding a position as a senior engineer in the Kong Gateway. Been with Kong for a long time. Was one of the first engineers actually joined the original team. And been doing a lot of stuff around the gateway, helping
Before Kong
customers.
was Kong, right? So
Before Kong was Kong, even yes. The product was already called Kong, but the company was still called Meshape, and that's been a hell of a ride.
What was the story behind naming the Kong Kong? Yeah, the shape is kind of, I understand, it's kind of like a the mashups, API mashups, all the portal stuff was like very interesting at the time. But what was the motivation to call the product Kong? Do you know?
Yeah, Meshape came to be as the name came from meshing apps. So you mash them together into one coherent thing.
Yeah. Yep.
And then it became Meshape. So something with apes. It's a lot of jungle. It is apes, and then hence came Kong as a name for the gateway. Once we had the open source product out, it just took off, and after a while, it became the main product, and the company was rebranded to be Kong as a whole. So.
I will use this opportunity to promote a little bit of the Kong Summit, right? So speaking about the jungles,
Yeah.
where API innovation runs wild. So this is the place where you want to be. Everyone wants to be because it's a API world and innovation that we will be delivering for coming years. You wanna see this the first place. And the things what we do in order to kind of like celebrate and prepare for Kong Summit is we're running virtual hackathon. And one of the streams that we're doing, if you joined us for the first time, it's great. Welcome, Kong Builders. This is a show that we're running almost every week, and we're building stuff. We're gonna be building something unusual. Today we're gonna be building something unusual. I hope you will enjoy this. What we prepared. And yeah, so for hackathon to celebrate summit, we also suggesting people to build something, extend Kong functionality that will solve some of their problems and maybe solve the problems in the larger community. So they will build something. And today we're going to be looking into native SDK that allows you to build plugins in this language called Lua. If you been here a few weeks ago, I did the show where I explained how you can build a plugin with Go. And Go is more like it's not the afterthought, but it's kind of like it's something that was added after. The Lua was there in the very beginning, and the Lua was, the biggest and important part of this, right? So that's where we're gonna be doing this today. Guys, what about we just like roll our sleeves and we'll start doing the thing. So the way how we were the way how we envisioned this show with Thijs before, I'm gonna start with the some of the basics of the Lua SDK where you get stuff. And he will be here because he's one of the developers who work on PDK as well, and he also developed a lot of plugins. So I thought that would be great to have him on the show, and he will be also holding my hands while I will be doing some stuff and saying, Victor, just don't do this, because Lua is not my strongest suit yet, but I'm excited. So we're gonna start with the thing that's where we should start. We should start with the Pongo, or we should start with the plugin template. How do you think?
I think we should start with the plugin template
Okay.
to get
So
an idea of how to start.
exactly. So if you go into the Kong GitHub, you can find this project called Kong plugin, and this is not just some project; it's a template project. So essentially, a team at Kong build a template that will have a structure of regular template that you have in for Lua. All the things, all automations are based here. So what you need to do is just you go ahead and just do fork with this template. You call it whatever you want. It's going to be part of your repository.
Victor,
Yep.
Victor,
Yes.
You probably
That's
want
where
to
it starts.
click the not the fork button, but since it's a template, you can
Use
say
template first thing. Yeah,
yeah,
because
exactly.
yeah. So when you're using template, you will create a new repository with this plugin, and you can put this stuff in place. I already have my template that we're gonna be using today, and I think it's called something like Kong Builders. I'm lacking of imagination of originality, so I will call it Kong plugin Kong Builders. One of the things that Thijs mentioned to me that this is important to be kind of consistent on the naming, and some of the things that we will walk through today and see how the naming is important. So I already have this. So for my local development, I'll just do GitHub repo clone, and I will go into my Kong plugin Kong builders. So for consistency, again, the naming should be something like Kong plugin dash, and this is the name of your plugin. So if you look into some plugins that are available there, right, you want to call this consistent with the other tools. Let me make the font bigger so that you will see what I'm doing here.
Yeah, while you do that, Victor, if you look at the GitHub repo for the template, the README has a list of. If you scroll down to the README, then you'll find there's the naming conventions and versioning conventions. There's quite some names involved. There is packages, there's modules, there is plugin names, etc., and they relate to each other. So once you pick a name, try and stick to the defaults because that will definitely make your life easier.
And many conventions that we have definitely will make sense while we will be going through this.
Yeah.
So it's a Lua. Why Lua?
Lua is
many people asking this question, like why Lua? Let's
many people ask us. Lua as a language is not a general purpose programming language. Lua is an extension language. So typically you have an application and you want you to provide scripting capabilities to your end users. So you add Lua and then your users can script their application. If most people are probably familiar with macros in, for example, Microsoft Excel or Word, and then you have Visual Basic for applications. Lua is basically an open source version for Visual Basic for applications. So you can take any application, you add Lua to it, and you make it scriptable. And essentially, the Kong core engine, which is built on top of Nginx, is an Nginx engine with a Lua scripting capability on top, and Kong itself is written in Lua. It's Kong very performant. It's very small.
It uses the OpenResty that uses Lua, right? So that's the stuff that we're using to build the Kong functionality.
Yeah, OpenResty is can consider to be a platform, and the platform consists of Nginx, the Lua module that extends Nginx, and then a whole series of libraries that make development easier when you build applications.
So when that's why the native SDK for Lua is we wanted to provide a tooling for the people for starting to do this extension like much easier and doing the things their way. So let's take a look what I have here. So first of all, what do I see here? So right now the fork doesn't have anything. So first thing that I want to see here is that it's not my plugin. It's called Kong Builders, right? So I can do something like view find where is it? Find
Can you
in.
switch your screen?
Yep, that's a good point. It's always good to have a copilot that can tell you um, what is going on here. So first of all, I want to do and changed my uh, um, change my plugin to Kong Builders because my folder is called Kong Builders, right? And this is what I want to do. Find where is it? Find replacing files. So I will go ahead and find something like my plugin, and I will replace it with the Kong Builders. So let's see. Okay, cool. Now another thing that probably makes sense to do is to rename this Lua Rocks. So Lua Rocks is a package manager that allows you to redistribute your Lua programs or Lua applications, and it makes sense to call it also not my plugin but my Kong Builders.
Yeah, actually, it has to be because otherwise you'll get errors thrown at you by lower rocks.
Again, if you are in doubt anytime, go and read this README. That will be available in your repository. Since you use this template, it will be part here. Whenever you will be ready to publish it, you can remove this. Once you create this template, you don't need to use this anymore. When you're ready to publish, you can clean up and put the stuff that is important for your plugin here. Now, so I do these things, and how I can validate this is my setup is actually ready for developing plugin. Thijs.
Have you changed already in the folders, the spec folder, which contains the tests? Have you
Yeah.
renamed
So
the my plugin?
my plugin
And
name.
in Kong slash plugin slash, there was also a my plugin. That's also been renamed, right?
And needs to be Kong
Builders. Yeah, all the same thing.
It's very similar to, it's kind of like a package structure, right? So in this case, it will be using the Kong plugins, Kong Builders. It's going to be your namespace or how you call it in Lua. Not the
Basically,
namespace.
basically you can consider this a plugin can be considered like a class. So this is a class of plugins, and then you can apply multiple instances while the system is running. But the plugin code itself is the class that contains all the code that executes.
Right. So in order to you continue to do some of the things, now you need to have some sort of tooling. So last time I showed you when you're using the PDK, it's good to run the content container, and after that bring the plugin this and build the plugin in the platform that you're running. However, in this case, we have something different. So when we're using PDK, we kind of people can rely to whatever tools they use on a particular platform. Whatever you're building for Go, whatever you're building for Python, whatever you're building for JavaScript. Here we're providing you with can we say opinionated way to do the things, right? So I think we can say that.
Yeah.
And this is what brings us to very cool a framework or like a set of tools that called a Pongo, not maybe Pongo, just Pongo. And we continue. I think we continue to this ape and the primates theme, and the Pongo also has something to do with this. Thijs, can you talk a little bit about like what is Pongo and like why it came about?
Pongo came about as we had more and more customers developing custom plugins and open source users likewise, and they needed a way to test it. Initially, when we started off years ago, the application itself was fairly easy to install and locally, and then you could also test the plugins. But at some point, it became for people that want to do just like minimal coding on a small plugin, but then had to set up an entire application and build stuff from source. That became a hassle.
We
and
have
at that
a
point we
we have a good question. What are plugins in we get in Kong? What's so if you go into it's me, it's my channel. Yeah, if you go to docs.kong.hq.com/hub, you will get into Plugin Hub and you will see what kind of plugins you can get. You can get a free plugins that are free and open source. You can go and check this out. And some of these plugins you can go and look source code and how they work with the external systems and things like that. Some of the plugins will be included in some enterprise subscriptions. So, but this is the good place to start to know what are the plugins, and
yeah.
there's even article what is the plugin.
And especially as you said, Victor, the source code for at least for the open source ones is available on GitHub. And since this is a Kong Builders, I would definitely recommend once you start building your plugins, find plugins that do some sort of similar thing as what you're trying to achieve, and start with reading the code and copy and pasting, and
Yeah.
then tweak it to make sure it does what you want it to do. It's a really good.
So let's see. For example, we can open this with Lambda plugin. We can see if we can invoke AWS Lambda. So it's supported by Kong. So it's safe to assume if I go somewhere like a Kong plugin, go to Kong repository. It's better to go there in private mode because I don't want to show you every secret that we have there in the public repository since I'm a part of the Kong team. And if I see AWS here,
These are probably bundled in the Kong core. So if you go to the Kong repository,
so we go into Kong
Kong
repository.
/Kong, yeah, and then if you go into plugins, first Kong and then plugins.
Kong.
Sorry.
We go
and then
into plugins, and
then here
AWS Lambda.
Exactly.
And we'll see something like handler. We're gonna talk about the structure of the plugin in a few seconds. But just like if you it's not somewhere you can go and look how it's done with some other plugin. For example, you want to integrate this with Google Cloud Functions, and this is where you can start to learn how you can do this. Now, Pongo. Let's get back to Pongo. As Thijs mentioned, this is the tool that our engineering team developed to support engineers who building engineers support engineers to building the tools, and we're gonna be using this one today for first of all validate what this plugin does. So first of all, this plugin already has some basic functionality on adding some extra headers, and we will show you in a second how it works. And so let's run this with Pongo. What the Pongo can do for us. I already have Pongo installed in my computer, so it's already installed. But you can follow along in the installation instructions. So it's quite simple. You essentially need to fork it and just add the Pongo binary into your path, and you will be good to go. Whenever you need to update.
Maybe it's good to have a small explanation about what Pongo does and how it works.
Yep.
There is if you scroll up to the commands, you'll see that there's two types of commands, all the way to slightly more.
Mm-hmm. I can show on my console.
Then there is we can show on the console as well. But there's here you can see there's project actions, and the second thing is an environment actions.
Mm-hmm.
Pongo is built around Docker Compose because quite often when you need to test something, you need dependencies. So you need a database to write your configuration in. If you create a logging plugin, you want to spin up a log server, so you make sure that the communications is there. And that is essentially the environment. So the environmental actions that you have with Pongo are aimed at getting that environment spun up, tearing it down, cleaning it up, everything you need. And then there's the project actions, and the project actions specifically are focused on your plugin. So you want to lint them, you want to run them, you want to pack them, or you want to create a local shell to create. Those are specific to your project. So typically what you would do, you'd spin up an environment, and then you start working with your project commands. And when you're done, you're tearing everything down the environment again. And the whole thing, like I said, it's based on Docker Compose. So if you're familiar with Docker Compose, you can like dig in and see everything that's running in it.
So what we're gonna start with is just to run Pongo. Let's do start from very beginning, like to make sure that we don't have anything here. Let's just do Pongo clean. We'll just to make sure that I don't have anything. So like, let's imagine we started from the very beginning. And the first thing that you probably want to do is something like Pongo up, right? That allows you to start all these containers. Again, as I mentioned, we're using the Docker. So Docker needs to be installed. What we found while preparing for the show that it works fine with Docker for desktop. With some alternative distributions, we might experience some of the your mileage might vary if you're using some alternative installations. So, and when I run this, I can do status. So when I run the status I see that Pongo already started few containers. So many of you know that when you're running Kong, you can use this in DBLS mode, or you can use this in with database. If you don't know the difference, somewhere here after the stream, you will see the link to my video where I'm explaining how to run Kong in Docker in 2 modes, and you will get this idea. Like somewhere here. I think so. Somewhere here it will be there. And now, so we're going to be using 2 databases, Cassandra and Postgres. It's one of the modes that support. In future, maybe Cassandra is already deprecated, so we will get rid of it. However, in the old version, you still might need to support this in your plugin if you're going to do backward compatibility or whatever. And now, so since I'm in the directory with my plugin, so I'm still here in my Kong builders. So Thijs, what I need to do in order to start testing. So I write something in my plugin. So we just, we need to make sure that at least basic functionality of the template is working. How I can check if it's working.
The first thing I would try is just start Kong. So I would say like open a Pongo shell.
So Pongo has this a container that include all developer tools based on particular Kong version. So since I clean up this version of this the Pongo shell, or let's call it Kong Pongo test, it's going to be local image and it's going to be published. First time it will do kind of installation, install all the tools that you need, JQ, HTTP, all the regular suspects, right? And we're gonna try to do a first thing that we call the manual test. So with the manual test, we need to start a Kong, configure plugin, the configure service, and try to invoke some endpoint with this particular plugin enable. While it's doing this. So right now we're still building image, and it was much faster when we're doing this together. But right now,
it's already there.
Yeah, it's there. Like thankfully, new hardware that we have these days is quite capable of running live stream plus building Docker containers. So as you can see here, when we running the shell, it has a prompt and some of the aliases for starting the things. So we're going to start with the Kong in the database mode. So in this case, we're going to be using Kong KMS, which is it will start Kong, connect to database, execute migrations. So the structure of the Kong configuration will be placed in database. Again, look to this video where I show this in details. So go to KMS, and now it's starting configuration. So it says declarative configuration not found, but we're gonna talk about this later. HTTP, HTTP, say port. I do have it somewhere config. So let's do. So what I did I just curl admin API for configuration. So let's see if we have our plugins here. And there's a bunch of stuff. Loaded plugins. And you see Kong Builder's already here. And the way how it's done is that when we're starting the Kong, we're already providing configuration with this plugin enabled. So see, with the configuration, we can have a bundle. So all the plugins that we have with open source version will be enabled in Kong Builders. Again, you can watch the previous stream where I also talk about this, how you can enable in the Go. This is like much easier. That's already tooling. Tooling make this easier for you. All right. So the next thing that we're going to be doing is to let's enable this plugin and see if this plugin in action, right? Let's see if we have service. Okay, so since I already removed, my history is gone. So we're going to start this from scratch. So we're going to do HTTP and we're going to do admin services. When in doubt, I always have Insomnia that has everything for me. So I need to do service with name and URL. So we're going to be doing name equals HTTP bin and URL. We're going to be doing something like HTTP bin.org/anything.
You probably need to change the
port.
Port to 8001.
Yep. And it's always it's always great to have a copilot in this type of shows when our audience are not. Let's see if we have any comments so far. No, sometimes we have a lot of people. Sometimes we have not so many people, and people just like, okay, so we will just sit here and see what is going on. So when I do mistakes happen. Now, so we're doing this. Next thing is to we're adding the path here. So with the Insomnia, we're gonna do this services, name of the service, and routes. So we just do services. We're gonna how we call it HTTP bin.
HTTP bin, yes.
/routes.
Routes.
And we just need to put paths. Root.
Plural
Paths.
with an S.
Yep. So now the service is modified. We do have here. So if I will do something HTTP to port, oops, we should get the response from HTTP bin. So this is the request. That the request is echoed here. Headers from request here, and this is response. So we're going through the Kong proxy now. All good. And the next thing is that we need to enable plugin, right? So we just do create plugin. So we need to hit the plugins with a name and some of the configuration. So we let's take a look on the plugin itself. When we're looking into schema, we do have some required configuration parameters here, right? So we do have this schema file will be responsible for defining a structure of configuration for your plugin. And internally, the Kong will be using this schema information to introspect what kind of parameters required for your plugin. This is the solely for your, whatever you want to do with the with configuration, you need to define this in this schema.lua file. So what I see here, that we have a few configuration fields, request header, response header, and those are required, but we also have a default value for them. So they kind of required, but not necessarily. We need to go and define this in our configuration. So what we can do, HTTP port 81 plugins and the name Kong builders. So we're going to enable this global plugin. So the next time, as you can see here, that the config was used and default configuration was used. So next time when I hit this, now I should be able to see This is a response header, as we can see in our code. And this is our response header. That's the by world. And this is our hello world thing. That's pretty much it. Like, that's how you can do manual testing of your plugin. And Thijs, did I forget anything to show?
I think what was worthwhile pointing out here is because it can be quite tedious to create a manual test setup like this. One of the aliases that's in here as well is an export alias. So you can do a KX, and that will export the current configuration as it is, and export it to a Kong.yaml file.
And the cool thing that
Exactly.
this file also will be available outside of the container. So since we mount this folder, and you see this configuration in a Kong format, and we have a service, one service that hits anything on HTTP bin with route, and this is actually pretty cool.
Now if you would like clean the databases, restart the environment, and do KMS again.
So let's do this one. For example, kill the container. Now everything is gone basically.
The Kong container is now gone. The environment is still up. So if you do
database
a
is still
restart,
up. So database is still up. If I'll do Pongo
restart, then it will tear everything down and restart it.
So as you can see, we're killing the containers for Cassandra, for Postgres, and we killed the network. So now it's gone. So essentially, whenever you need to do this kind of cleanup, just do restart and it will be clean. So next time, if I'll do this Pongo.
But also be careful, because everything that was in your database is now gone. So it's good to clean, but be careful.
It's splendor miseries of containers, right? So you can have you can start any type of software very easy, but be careful if you playing around with this and kill some data. Make sure that this data is exported somewhere. Now, if I will run this up again, right? So I need to bring the database up.
They were already started.
Okay,
because you did a restart previously.
Yeah. When I did the restart, it's already up. Okay, so in this case, I'm just getting back to shell. And what it will do, we didn't tear down the whole environment, so the shell was available, so container just restarted. Now, so when I run this, I can run the KMS, right? I can run the KMS, and it will be the bring in the database and configuration. And let's do this one. Showing this one more time, what would be different. Now it's found the Kong YAML and import declarative configuration. So what I need to do is HTTP say port 8080. Now the plugin and the service is already configured. So because it was able to bring this from the file. So what's
from the declarative config file?
Yeah, how I can kill the Kong now? So.
KP, Kong stop. KP.
Kong stop, and now I can do KDB. DBL. So now it will start Kong without that connection to database. But since we already have a Kong configuration file, our service is still there. You will not be able to call the services endpoint and admin API in DBLS mode. DBLS mode will require the configuration file available for you to have configuration. But this is kind of like different options that you can try around and play. One last thing that before I will pass my the steering wheel to masters and experts in something cool. So we'll see how we can do like something more complex things. I'll show you that this repository is pretty dope because it's also including some of the GitHub actions. So whatever you will be pushing to your GitHub, we already have some of the actions that you can run the test in CI/CD pipeline. There's a per pull request. You can run the test. Different metrics of versions that you can run against. the what I wanted to show you that you can do the local run of this test. So all the specs that you have inside this will be executed through this test. So if I run the Pongo run inside directory of my plugin, it will pick up the tests and it will execute those tests in automatic fashion. We There's a configuration that we have for Pongo. It uses Postgres and Cassandra right now, so it will start Pongo in Cassandra, and all the tests will be executed against a DBLS, Postgres, and Cassandra mode. So you will make sure that your plugins will be running in this one. So with the
yep. Victor, one of the nice things here what you see is because you can define your own dependencies. So if there is, for example, an open source plugin called Zipkin that defines an external dependency for a Zipkin server, and it's embedded inside your plugin test environment. So if you use this repo and Pongo, then you can one-on-one move it in your CI system, do Pongo run, and Pongo will take care of the rest of it. It will start all the dependencies. It will pull in.
Is the Zipkin is a built-in plugin or it's a plugin?
It's an open source plugin, and okay, I think I think it's built in. I think it's built in.
Okay, let's take a look.
So it's in the Kong repo.
And set Kong and go.
And then, but the essence is that Pongo takes the hassle out of it, so you don't have to write complex CI scripts with starting all your dependencies, configuring them. It's just a Pongo run, and Pongo will spin up Docker Compose, set up all the environments, and then run the tests.
Is there any the way how I can show
you would how you have to Pongo. Go to the top level, and then into the spec folder, which is where the tests reside.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's plugins, number 3. And then see whether we have
probably Zipkin somewhere on the end, yep, because it's a Z.
And then here there spec. Is there's a spec file, but there's I actually don't know where the independent plugin configurations are supported here. Yeah, maybe it was a bad example.
Maybe.
But there is definitely. I think the old Zipkin repository is still around.
So let's try to do something
here,
like a Kong
you'll find
plugin.
The old one.
Kong plugin. Something.
Just search for Zipkin. Search for Zipkin because there's many plugins and there's only one Zipkin probably.
Okay, we'll just do. Okay, it's archived, but it will give the idea.
Yeah, it gives the idea of if you go into .pongo, you can see. Here you can see that Zipkin is enabled, but the definition of what Zipkin is in Zipkin.yaml, and essentially it's just a Docker Compose snippet. But if you define the dependency, Pongo will find it and will use this snippet to actually spin up a Zipkin container according to this configuration.
So
how build those, all of that is documented in the Pongo README. It's a bit too much, I think, to go over today. But
it's so it's already there, so you can go and learn yourself. So we were thinking again, and I showed you how to do the run the plugin. So basically, if I will just go ahead and do things like if I would do stuff like this, let me push these files into my stage all. Let me get it. I don't need this stage. I'll just do push and inside my I want to show the one last thing here. And we're going to talk a little bit about the internals of plugins and how we can how it works from integrating what parts of the Kong we can integrate. So I just did the actions. Let's see. It's just run the test. 15 hours ago.
Yeah, the reason that this fails is that this
Because
requires a
it's
Kong enterprise license, and that
so
enterprise license is not available in your local repo.
yeah, and the
So
thing is that my action will include different
enterprise,
enterprise
yeah,
nightly EE, and it's not there, but some of the tests will be working because previously it failed because of the naming conventions and all this type of stuff. Now it should be ready to use. All right, so we look into this one. The two files important. The handler is basically where we're gonna defining our logic, and if we're gonna be looking into this something called like the access phase or the header filter and all these type of things. This is where we can interject in different phases of the request, and this is where I'm passing this to Thijs. Let me know when your screen will be ready to show this, and I will pass this to you so you
let
can walk us
me,
through
yeah,
the request response lifecycle and where you can interject.
let me share my screen.
All right, so let's see.
Can you see my screen?
Okay, we switching back to. Yep, we are now
Yeah,
seeing your screen, and
that looks like
everyone
it.
in internet should be able to see it.
Yes. So I essentially did the exact exercise, same exercise as what Viktor did with. I just created a plugin called MiniAuth. Created a repo. It's just a fresh clone of the same template. If we go into a code editor, then what we find here is some of the CI. Let's first start with why the thing failed that Viktor was just showing. If you look at the tests, then we can see that we have enterprise versions here. So if we remove those, we only have open source versions left. And then the license also we don't need to get because we don't have an open enterprise version anymore. And this should be good enough to get this going. Wait, I'm doing a check. That is not, this is, yeah, this one should go. The Kong version is there. The license we don't need, as commented here. This one, and this is also Kong internal. So if we reduce it to this, this should now be good enough to make the test pass. So let's save this one. Now, if we take a look at a plugin and everything that we have in this repository, because there's a lot of files in here. At the top, we have the standard GitHub workflows. Then there's Pongo with some configurations. Kong is where we actually have our plugin. Spec is where we return our tests. And then there's a series of configuration files. Busted is a Lua test framework, and that's what runs the tests. It has a configuration, but this is like all documented in the standard Busted tools, how you can use it. Editor config is nothing Lua specific, it's just a generic editor setup that strips trailing white space, makes sure that the indents are correct, etc. Get attributes. If you are developing on Windows, then this will make sure that the plugin gets the proper line endings, etc. And there's no issues with that. Git ignore, also the usual. Lua check is a linter. Lua is a dynamic language, so it's easy to make typos. So Lua check is definitely recommended to use to lint your plugins. Lua Cuff is a coverage analysis tool that can be used. Then we have a license, which by default is the Apache license. There's a README, and then there's a rock spec. As Vic was already mentioned, the rock spec essentially is a sort of a manifest file for when you distribute your plugins.
So you will be able to do the Lua rocks install blah 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 in
exactly
whenever you distribute.
Yeah. If you look at the Lua rocks webpage. Let's say we go to bluerocks.org. Then you can quickly see, if you search for Kong, for example, that your plugin, whatever it is you're going to write, is definitely
quite
not
a few
gonna
things
be,
there. Yeah.
definitely not going to be the first one, nor is it going to be the last one. So this is where you can find lots of plugins, and you can use command line tools to get them installed and actually run them. Going back to the editor. So I have to do a bit of the same exercise that Viktor just did. So let me change my plugin to mini-auth to make sure that we have that in the same name. The same goes for the spec folders. It should also be mini-auth. And here another mini-auth. Since we have that done, let's find in this folder my plugin and replace it with mini-auth, and we're going to replace them all. Replace. Now we should be good to go. This is now all saved. So now let's see if we can get the same thing going. I am in a shell in the same directory. Let's check Pongo status to see what we have up and running. I have a number of Kong images, but I have nothing running yet because there's no Pongo containers currently running. So Pongo up. Let's do that to make sure that the containers are starting. While we do that, let me make sure that the tests run a bit smoother by in the integration tests. We're going to add a small if statement here. If strategy equals Postgres, then. And then we make sure that we're going to run only one set of tests instead of 3 sets of tests. So we're only going to run the Postgres tests, and all the other ones we're going to skip. Let's see whether we have the environment available. Environment is here. So do I have... let me check whether I have print and grab Kong version. Do I have a Kong version set? I don't have one set, so let's say that we export Kong version. This is, by the way, the environment variable is the way you specify which Kong version you want to test against, and we're going to set it
in a particular shell, so it can be, you can try to run different version of Kong against.
Yeah. And you can even run it in parallel. It's maybe good to know. Like here, you can see the names. They all have a suffix, which is a hash of the directory in which the plugin is located. And this is especially important if you run plugin tests in parallel in CI, that you can run multiple plugin tests in parallel on the same VM without having any collisions between the environments.
And how it's so it's creating network per directory, right? So in per plugin directory.
Yes, indeed. And it also has all the dependencies. So Postgres, Cassandra, everything is run per directory.
So right now we kind of like we modify the things because we don't need Cassandra. I'm just reiterating. So instead of kind of like using all spec kind of configuration, you saw how Thijs did this in a config.
Yeah, in your test we saw that we had now we see only 4 lines. Essentially, there's 2 tests. Each test has a start and an end, a run and an OK. So there's 2 tests here, and these are labeled with Postgres. And the other ones that we saw in yours were labeled with Cassandra and dbless. And I just disabled them just for the sake of speed, basically.
I always do this when disable all my tests for the speed.
Yeah, disabling all the tests is really fast. That really helps.
Yep.
So let's see. Let's go into what we can do with a plugin, because Viktor already explained this is the plugin schema. The schema defines the configuration. I'm not going to add too much on it here. Let's go into the handler, and the handler defines hooks. Basically, in the flow of a request, there's several hooks where Lua code can execute and can modify the request and change things or interact with it or reach out to remote server to validate stuff and either allow or reject a request. Anything you like to do with requests, pretty much. Now, if you look at the template, you'll see that we have a plugin definition. It has a priority. The priority set is statically set in
What does it mean
plugin.
1,000? Like, what does it mean, and what kind of priority you need to set for your plugin? Why you can say like my plugin is super important? Why not 1?
It depends on the order in which you want it to run. There is some logic to it. Specifically, anything that requires, for example, authentication to be set already. For example, the access control list plugin requires that authentication has run before it. So the access control has a lower priority than the authentication plugins. That ensures that authentication plugins run first, identify the specific consumer or user, and only then it runs the access control list to validate whether the user actually is allowed to make
and
that request.
This is very important for when you have a chain of plugins is also very important.
Yeah.
So it basically there's a, I don't know, is it misconception, but I saw some people like thinking that, oh, if I would specify plugins in certain order in my configuration file, they will be executed in this order. So that's not precisely correct assumption. They will be.
No, that's not precisely correct. And also there's things are changing. So this one has 1,000, which is a common priority for the pre 3.0, which was released this week. After 3.0, the priorities have shifted because we had too many plugins. We didn't anticipate this many plugins, so we had too many plugins too close together. So now we loosened the space up to make sure that we have enough room for customers to inject their plugins as specific.
So now
priorities.
1,000 is going to be default.
I think 1,000. This is the old one.
Uh-huh.
I don't even know what the new one is, but there's more room between the plugins, and there's a new really great feature, but that's unfortunately on the enterprise, that allows you to create dynamic priorities. So when you configure a plugin, you can change the priority when it runs. Yep. It's also a very dangerous thing. This is a very highly requested feature, but it's also dangerous for the same reason that I mentioned before. If you do the plugins in the wrong order, you can really mess things up.
So if you're interested in this type of jazz, you can look up for the plugin that Thijs developed. It's kind of like a tool that can change the static priority, but it will basically generate new plugin that you need to rebuild and deploy. But for enterprise version in 3.0, stay tuned. Actually, I was working on the blog post for this. Very soon will be published about how this works and how you can use this in your application. So here's his inside scoop for you, the attendees of the live stream.
Okay, so back to the plugin code. Because here what we see a number of functions that are being defined. This one is called init worker. We'll come back to that one. This one is commented out because it's not used in this template. We can simply remove a comment by adding an extra dash, and now you can see the colorization that it actually gets enabled now. This is another hook when the SSL certificate comes in and you want to check something on that one. And there's more of those. Now, obviously, main question now is like, what are those things and what can I do with them?
Where you basically inject your logic. So as you understand, the plugin is essentially sits somewhere in your request response between. So the gateway is something that sits between your upstream service. We call all the services that we be sitting behind a call upstream service, and where you need to put your logic? That's a very good question, and let's talk about this.
Yeah. So so what are those hooks and how does that work? This is a diagram. It's not a Kong diagram. It's actually an OpenResty diagram that displays the different phases that a request goes through in an Nginx instance or OpenResty. And the requests are actually handled basically like top to bottom through this flow diagram. And some of these have Kong hooks, some don't. If you look at having a client on the left and an upstream service that's actually providing the service with Kong as a proxy in the middle, what happens is that when a request comes in, it will go through these different phases. And then at the end of the access phase, it will actually proxy the request to the backend, where the backend can actually do whatever the business functionality is that the backend provides. The backend then sends a response, and that goes back through Kong, and it will stepwise go through the other phases until it hits the end, and then it sends the response downstream. The final phase, the log phase, which is outside of this request response cycle, and that's exactly what it is. It is outside the cycle because the log phase runs asynchronously after the response has been sent. So logging will never delay a response. It will not add to your latency. Now, if this is how it works, how does that, sorry, too quick. There's one more, which is here at the top, you can see there's also two application level hooks, init by Lua and the init worker. And these are hooks that you can do to do initialization when the application starts. They run once. Everything else at the bottom is on a per request level, whereas the top two only run when on application start or reload or restart.
Is it fair to say, for example, if you're dealing with some external service and you need to establish like initial connection or whatnot, you need to run this in init phase, kind of like a restart connection? You don't need
No,
to
only if you need to connect some initial, you have to fetch some initial state, but definitely not long-lived connections. You should not be creating those.
Okay.
No.
So what?
They are
How to
typically
deal
created
with
on demand.
Yeah, how to deal with the long-lived connections that needs to. I think it
The
would be
long-lived, yeah, it's quite detailed, but the engine itself will use connection pooling. So from code perspective, you recreate the connection every time. But under the hood, the connection is kept alive and is reused and reused and reused.
Makes
so it's
sense. Okay.
pretty performant. But from the code perspective, it means like you reconnect every time. If we go from here to actually like, how does this hook into what Kong can do? Here's the same picture with the request and response, and the green arrows sort of like relate to like the original phases that we had to what Kong can do. So the init phase, it runs when Kong gets loaded. There's an init worker, and then for each request, there's a certificate to rewrite in the access phase. Sounds like a lot. What do you need to know? When you start, pretty much access phase. The access phase is like the workhorse of this schema. It runs like 95% of like all plugins execute in the access phase.
Yep.
Probably from the remaining 5%, 4.5% will probably run in the header filter phase on the way back on the response. And everything else is probably logging. Body filter, certificate rewrite are very seldomly used, only if you have very specific requirements.
What about if you want to modify kind of like a response of the, I'm just thinking the functionality of the, request transformer and the response transformer type of plugins, where you should put logic for.
It depends on what you want to change. The header filter, if there's anything about the status of the headers, anything you want to change, then you do it in header filter. If you want to change the body, then you have to go to the body filter phase. Because that's
if I want to do something like I don't know, the XML to JSON transformation, I should do this in body phase, right?
That should be done in the body filter. Yes.
So here's
the
idea.
On the way in, on the request, you go into the access phase, and in the access phase you read the body. The access phase works slightly different than the body filter.
Here's the idea for our attendees who watch this right now, like don't have any idea what to do in the hackathon. Like write something that transforms your SOAP service to, I don't know, GraphQL. whatever. That's gonna be
Nice.
a pretty dope thing to do.
Yeah, definitely. But at least here you have an overview of like how the process of the request flow will actually work with the hooks that we have defined inside the code. So in the code, we'll see the init worker, certificate, rewrite, access, header filter, body filter, and log phase. And we close this down. Here we are. And let me just get some of this stuff out of the way because there's a lot of boilerplate stuff here. So let's remove. Here we have init worker, which we won't be using. Then a certificate. We'll also not be using this. Rewrite, we will not be using this. And here we have the access phase. This is where most of the stuff is. And this is also where the current template code is. Header filters on the way back. So we're not going to use that either. So we're going to remove it. Body filter, we're going to remove it. And then there's the logging.
While Thijs does the cleanup, I want to say that the same phase is available in other PDK SDKs, like in JavaScript and Go. So the similar idea. If you want to do modification in a previous stream, I show how you can do this in Go in access phase. Is the same thing. It's just like different phases and different methods are exposed with the native.
Yeah, maybe it's good to add here that one of the main difference between the Lua code and Go or Python or JavaScript is that the other languages run out of process. So basically, there's another process running next to the Kong process inside the same container that will actually execute all the plugins, but it does mean that there's some overhead involved with marshaling all the data in and out of that process, and that's why the Lua environment actually is, typically if you write it properly, it's going to be more performant than the external ones.
Simply, it's because close to the heart.
Yeah, exactly, and it
also means like it can close to the heart of Kong, and because Kong written in Lua. Plus, it's also close to the heart because of the heart of the request. That's joke here.
So here we are with 20 codes left, which actually 20 lines of code left, which actually is a working plugin. This thing will just work. It won't pass the test anymore because we removed the header on the response. But this in itself is a functioning plugin in just 20 lines of code. So what I set out to do for today was actually to go and create a plugin that does a very minimal authentication. The idea would be we're going to create a plugin that makes when a request comes in, it grabs a header and makes a request to a remote server. If the remote server responds with 200 OK, the request is allowed. If the remote server responds with anything else, we're going to deny the request. We're going to deny access. So what do we need to do? First thing we need is we need a header, because when we get in the access phase and a request comes in, we need to figure out like what header do we need to grab. So if we look in our schema, we can see that we already have, we can pretty much all of this, we can leave the same. We had a request header, and let's say that we're going to rename this, and we're going to name this auth header. And we're going to do, we're going to mini auth, named after our plugin, for the default. The other ones, are we going to need them? I would say probably not. So let's just delete those, and then we should be good to go. Is this still a complete, or did I? All the accolades are matching, so this is still okay. So we now changed the default schema, and we now have a schema with a single header name, which is the auth header, and it's called mini auth. If we go into this one, the first thing we would need to do is we would need to get the actual headers. How do you know where you can find headers? That is what you find in the Kong documentation. Kong docs, reference, And we just revamped our documentation.
So new version of documentation is always a nice thing to do and learn about this during the live streams.
That's a great thing to learn during a live stream.
Yeah,
Anyway, if we take the old one, then we have we have plugin development kit for 2.8. So we got what we need. In the plugin development kit, we can have a Kong request here, and then we can see like where do we find headers. Kong request dot get forwarded path, forwarded prefix, HTTP version, get method, get path. Where are the headers? Get headers. Here's a single header, this one. And we just need to get the name. This why? Okay, if it doesn't want to work with me, I'll just copy it here.
And I will paste this into PDK.
Local auth header is Kong request.get header. And now we don't need to find the host header, but we need to do plugin conf dot auth header, because that's the name that we gave in our schema. Now, if there is, first thing we need to check, like, is there an auth header, or did we even get one? So if we did not get an auth header, then in Lua that means there's a nil value. It's not a string, but it's a nil value. If we don't get an auth header, so we can do a boolean not auth header, then and we have to enter request. So Kong dot, let's go. Yeah, now I don't look like a pro anymore because I actually have to go and look up this stuff. So
I'm wondering if the ID, if there's ID that can understand like Lua code very well and suggest you some of the.
Unfortunately, there's no for Kong specifically. There's not code completion.
Yeah.
But that is, would be great if we could at someday actually create this. So here we're gonna see we can just create a Kong response exit and we give it a 200 success. Obviously, we're not gonna do that in this case. But this, by the way, this return here is not necessary because if you do an exit, it does not return. So the code ends here, the code flow. It's just good practice that you actually do a return so that a casual reader would actually know like, hey, the code is terminating here, the code path. And if we don't have a header, we're gonna say a 403. And if a 403, we don't even need a message, but we can say a message. Please provide all details.
So when we can we also like attach the like a header information as well? For example, say I want to make sure that people know that this is actually a message from the header from the plugin. Like what's the what's the convention of reporting this type of jazz? For example, like when this error appeared, people needs to understand why. Maybe someone misconfigured and enabled this plugin and they not intended to. What would be a general recommendation?
There's two sides to it. Like here you can see the actual definition of the function. You give a status code, then a body, and then potentially headers that you can send. Yeah. In this case, because it's an authentication plugin, you would not provide too much details. Typically,
it's kind of like conventions. Like if it's a security stuff.
If it's security, because you don't want to provide any attacker with like it's typically like if you do a password, then you never get like your email is okay, but the password doesn't match, because then you're giving away that the email is okay. Yeah. So basically, you say this password email combination does not work, and the same here. If it's authentication, provide as little details as you find. You just give a 403 unauthenticated, and that's it. So probably I should
Yeah.
do this to make it slightly better.
And we can do even like a flip the bird emoji to be
Yeah, you can add. You
more
can
explicit.
basically this is the raw body that is sent. So you can add if you need XML type output, you can put XML in there. You can JSON. You would probably set the response headers
So basically,
accordingly.
this kind of
But
like a response thing is a kind of like a thing that you can add more things. It's kind of like a mutable,
yeah, but the only thing is that
mutable
there is
thingy.
that in this case, if you do response access here, it means that the flow terminates, and that any other plugin that has like a lower priority that would run later would not run. In this case, only the plugins on the response would still run, but any other plugin will in this phase will no longer run because this is the end of this request basically. So one thing we did not touch on yet is how do you debug, and this is actually what this thing is for. Kong log inspect. You can actually display. So let's move that here. And we could actually try and make that visible. Because typically when we do things like this, now I have to go and do a split screen and see what happens. So let's go into Kong dash plugin dash mini-auth. And what we can do here, because I'm now in the same directory, I'm in my plugin directory again, and a very helpful command is Pongo tail. And Pongo tail will find the running Kong instances that you have, and it will actually tail the log files. So in this case, we can see here that we have some output. This is from the previous run. So if I clear this and I do another Pongo run, the tests are going to fail, no doubt, because we changed the code, but not the tests. But we should be getting Y. Oh, this is an interesting schema init. Okay, so I had moved some in my schema. I have removed some fields here, but in the entity checks, that an entity check, like each field has its own checks. Like in this case, this field is required and has a default value. But sometimes for a full configuration, you also need across different fields, you need to validate other stuff. So in this case here in the template, there is like at least one off. You must at least provide the request header or the response header. And the request header and the response header cannot be the same. So this is like additional checks that you do over the full plugin configuration and not on one individual field.
Is it
But
something
I'm now referencing fields.
This is something that comes with the framework. This like a busted framework, or it's a part of the checks that Kong does.
This is part of Kong. This is
okay.
part of Kong.
All these DSLs, DSL like type of.
Yeah, this is a DSL that allows you to configure this stuff. Yeah. But now I'm referencing fields that are no longer there, and that's why it gives me the error. So let's remove that as well and give it another try and see if I am speaking the truth or not. And now it fails with another error. Oh, these are actually, now it runs, but the tests are failing. And you can see that the unit tests, which actually test the schema, are now failing, probably because they use the same fields that are no longer there. But what the thing was about is that we now see in this run, in this test run, we can actually see that here we see the output. And now I have to make this
a little bit smaller in order to fit this on the one screen.
Yeah, to get this in one screen. And you can see, if you look at the logs, that you can see here it says like the Kong handler 12 from mini-auth. And then it gives me a pretty printed version of a table. A table is a structure in Lua. And this is the output of this call, Kong.log.inspect.
The
so if you're debugging and you're wondering like, what is the data that I'm getting here? How can I check what is going on under the hood? This is an excellent way.
Now you have it, folks. This is the console.log is always your the tool for debugging stuff.
Yeah, unfortunately, with Lua, the OpenResty environment is not capable of running interactive debuggers.
Yeah, remote debuggers and things like that.
Yeah, so remote debuggers are not don't work. Typically, it also doesn't work with HTTP requests because typically a client request times out after 30 seconds. And you just found the value that you were looking into, and then the whole connection breaks and everything is gone.
Yeah.
So that doesn't work anyway. But this is a surefire way in the logs to find all the data that you need, and this definitely works. So let me just exit this one and go back to this one. So now that we have this plugin configuration, and we can actually, I already deleted it. No, never mind. So this one, let's comment it out for now because we're not using it. And this one as well.
My SQL friends will love Lua because they use the same comment for double dashes.
Yeah, that's actually true. That is actually true. This is it's. I don't think it's a very common convention, but you'll get used to it.
Yeah,
I guess. So now we have we're grabbing a header, we're getting a value. If the header is not there, we're just sending in for unauthenticated. And let's see whether we can write a test that actually verifies that. So if we look at first off the schema, we have a field auth header, and it is required, and the default is mini auth. So let's look at our specs. If you look at the tests are a framework. I think there's similar frameworks for like JavaScript with describe and it blocks that do.
Sounds like a BDD, BDD style, kind of like a behavior driven.
Typically it's quite at least writing is a different thing, of course, because you need to get used to like the specifics, but reading it should be fairly straightforward.
Yeah.
So let's see if we can see this distinct thing. We completely deleted it. So that's not going to work. So let's try if we're going to validate, because we said it was required. So what if we set it to an nginx.null? I'm not even sure whether it's the nginx.null value or if we set it to null, basically meaning that's the difference in our schema here, where we say required is true and the default is this, but it doesn't mean that you can't force it
to be
to nothing.
Yep.
Yeah. So if you set it to null, a JSON null in your in the management API, you would essentially tell Kong like delete the value, not even the default value, and that is what required is true actually prevents, because it prevents you from not explicitly specifying a null value and not providing anything. So if we have this now. This one I need to save as well. So let's look at this one. We're specifying JSON null, then the error is nil, and this is true. This should be okay. That's not still going to fail. Let's remove this test. So we have one unit test left, and it says auth header is required. Let's do it like this, and then run the tests. And then, just for the sake of it, I'm gonna do run only the unit tests. So you can specify individual test files that you want to run. I'm gonna run only this one. And it says auth header required field missing. That's interesting because this is the test. I didn't write the test properly, but I wrote it bad on purpose to make sure that I do see the proper error. And now we see that Kong responds with config auth header required field is missing. And that's exactly because I specified a null. So to fix that test, let's see, the error is, error must be a table. And error dot, what do we have here? Config.auth header .auth header is required field is missing. Assert dot equals.
You have a typo on the equals.
Let's do some error. And this one we move up here. And OK should now be false because we want this to fail. And now it will still fail, but now it will only fail incorrect with just a specific string that is not matching. And here we see it passed in a string, required field is missing, and this is what I said. So we just copy paste this.
So as always, do not trust the test that you never seen failed. So that's what the Thijs is doing. This is showing the best practices of unit testing. So
yeah, I just want to ensure that if it's not okay, that it actually does fail.
Yeah.
And once I know that the test is proper, I update the values to make sure that and now we see that it actually is green. And this means that we actually now testing that whatever we defined in the schema here that says that that this one is required and it has a default value, that it actually works like this. So typically you'd also have another test that validates that the default value gets set, but let's skip that one for now.
Before we running a little bit over the time in our stream. Before we disconnect, yeah. I really want you to show some of the pointers how they can interact with external systems, and specifically the thing that you mentioned, like okay, so you need to hit some other service. What are the API available in order to just like test the grade. Let's see if we can do this kind of like hitting the service. We have a 200. It's
To do that, we'll be using a library called Lua REST HTTP, which is the primary HTTP client for OpenREST. It's on GitHub, including all its documentation.
Oh yes, it's a very good pointer because it's also you can also show how we can install a dependencies to our plugins and some of the libraries that our plugins will be dependent. Yeah,
in this case, there's not a need to do this because this one ships with, this is built in with Kong. But here we can see a simple example like a single shot request that makes a request to a backend. And let's make sure that we take this one as well. Let's make sure that we copy the whole thing, since we're being lazy anyway.
Mm-hmm. And that's what we do on the Kong.
So first thing,
it's copy pasting and pray if it will work.
Exactly. So first thing I do, I'll move the required library here. So HTTP is required HTTP like this, and here we're gonna do local HTTP client is http.new. I'm going to create a new client, and we're going to make a request to
HTTP bin, because it can send us 200 on request or something like that.
Yeah, so, but this means we need another scheme here, because we need a URL to be defined where
Like
we're going to send this.
Off URL, because we don't want to have
exactly
hard-coded things.
I think it is. What URL does that exist? Let's say that we don't do this, and we're just gonna make this a type is string. We're just gonna make a string. We're not gonna add any validation.
Yep.
And the default is http:/status/403, which means it will return us a 403 echo on every request. So now that we have a URL, do we still have the accolades in place? Yes, everything's matching. So here we're going to make a request, and we're going to make the request to, let me just hide this on the left. And we're going to make the request to plugin conf dot of URL. Method is going to be, let's just do a get. Body is going to be token equals dot dot, and then we're going to add the auth header value that we got from our header. This is what we're going to put in the body. Content type is application text, and this should get us a request. Then let's make sure that we have this nicely lined up. And if the response is empty, it's a nil value, then we can use a Boolean if not. Then we're going to say request failed with an error, and we're going to return a same type request, except that in this case it's not an authentication error, but it's a internal server error, because we don't know what happened, but something on our end is wrong, because the request itself failed.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't get a bad status. It's just that the request failed. The connection was borked, whatever. So let's do this, and then let's get our Kong log inspect. See what we're getting here. Kong log inspect with our response body, res. And then see if we run the test, what's going to happen. We first have to actually write a test in this case, obviously. Because in an integration spec, we can create in the integration spec something we haven't looked at yet. The outer loop that we see here and that I modified here with this thing is a loop that moves over all strategies, so Postgres, Cassandra, and DBless. Let's make sure that we're testing plugins against every possible backend. Once we are inside that loop, we're writing the plugin name, and then we're going to do a setup. And the setup means that we're going to get some database helpers. Interestingly, this just sidestep, but this is, I think, an important one. If you're wondering about the test helpers and how they work, because a lot of those are not on the Kong website. But again, there is Pongo to the rescue. Pongo has a command, it's called docs. All the Pongo commands also have a dash help option. So you can, it's easy to read up on what it does. And what Pongo docs does, it takes the Kong test helpers, renders documentation, and then opens it locally.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow. That's pretty cool.
In this case, very quick because apparently I had a cached version here. But for example, the call that we had in our test helper here. So here we have a test helper that actually starts Kong with a specific configuration. Now, if you want to know what that does and how that thing works, you can actually look up here on the left-hand side, the shell helpers, and then here is the Kong start one. Mm-hmm. And it has documentation of how it works, and it includes good examples. This one goes, for example, for DNS fixtures, so you're mocking DNS records. If you don't want to create an external dependency, you can even create your own. In the end, Nginx is an HTTP server, so if you need an HTTP server, you can create your own local HTTP server inside Nginx, and you can just loop the request to the local instance and get an HTTP response from it.
That's pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah, so and it's definitely, we designed this because originally we didn't have it, and it made our tests slower because all the tests were hitting like mod bin or HTTP bin, and at the same time, any network failure will make
fail
your
the test
test
just because of the firewall will not allow to go to internet and things like that.
And this is this made the test a lot more reliable. But there is an existing mock one inside Kong that we will be using in the normal tests. So here we start Kong, but just before we start Kong, we actually generate a configuration that we see here. So we're injecting a route. There's no need to create a service because the default service that is in the test environment will loop back the request to Kong and hit an echo service that is defined inside Kong, exactly as I just explained. In this case, what we do, we inject a route that is called test1.com. So if we make a request to test1.com, we're going to make sure that we're going to hit this endpoint. Second thing we'll do is we're inserting a plugin on top of the route with this ID, which is this route, and with this configuration. And in this case, we're going to have an auth URL is going to be http bin bin.org/anything. It will let me think. We need the plugin is the endpoint rover, and so we need this is the one for status /200. This would give us a route for a succeeding test.
Yep.
And let's do another one. So let's call route 2. And the host is going to be test2. I'm going to add it to route 2. And here we're going to say there's going to be status 403.
So essentially, it's we can mock insert the fixture for particular plugin configuration and test the different permutations and see how the logic will handle this.
Exactly,
it's pretty dope.
Yeah. So here the successful one is test1.com, and the unsuccessful one is test2.com. So now we're going to make a request. Let's first clean up this one as we did with the unit test. So let's say we're going to make a request, and we're going to make a get request we're going to hit test1.com here. And then here we can validate the responses that we see. In this case, we want to see status 200. The header, however, is we need to inject an additional. We need our header name was mini auth, and we're going to set that to a value. The reason, by the way, that I'm using this syntax is that a dash is not a valid Lua identifier, so we need to push it in wrappers. Like host is written down below here, but this would be the same format and just as valid. It's just, if you just type host, it's just a shorter form, but it's in the end the same thing. Many others we're gonna set, our super secret in here. So we're gonna make a request. We're providing the auth header, so we should not be getting a
so this is the test. This is the test where we're gonna hit the request with the test1 head the URL that will be essentially represented by HTTP status 200.
Yeah. So we're gonna hit this test1.com, which means that we're gonna hit this route and then we're gonna hit this plugin. And the auth URL is making our request go to HTTP status 200, the request from the Kong gateway to the backend to validate the authentication is going to be to, so it should give us a 200 in return. So let's give it a try and run it. And it's most definitely going to fail. But let's do. But let's see what it gives us. And while we're at it, I'll go into
Pongo
dash plugin dash auth Pongo tail, so we can actually follow up on what is happening. And here we can already see, it's a bit.
That's all right.
I can see the last bit of our test. It only shows the last 10 lines of the logs now. Let me run this again. Now we should see the full output. But it gives us the response we wrote.
What we're expecting. Yep.
So here we can see the full response body header. I mean, I won't zoom in because then it becomes unreadable probably, but you can see there's a body reader function. It has a body. These are the headers that we're getting returned.
From HTTP.
And where is the status? The status is indeed a 200 because we said the auth is going to be, we're going to hit /status/200 endpoint. So HTTP bun does as it promised and it returns us a 200. Now the tests are failing.
I believe
because it says, we have a logic that says we're still looking for a header called hello world, which was a remnant from our template, and it actually lists these. This is also a good thing to show because the assertions we use in the tests here.
It looks like they are
we have
aware.
An assertion here.
Yeah, kind of like aware of.
So you take this is the response object that we have, and we're checking that the response R actually has a status 200. And the next thing we do is that we assert that the request R, which is not the, is actually not the response, but the request that is echoed inside the response R, that that request has a header hello world. And the nice thing about these assertions, which are all documented in the same documentation that I showed before, the nice thing about these assertions is that they also print very valuable output, because actually it says like, hey, I expected this header hello world, but I didn't find it, and then it actually lists all the ones that it did find. So if you make a small typo, you can very easily see what is wrong.
Yeah,
In
that's
this case, we
helpful.
can see that our plugin that was supposed to send in the mini auth header to the backend that we configured with super secret, we can actually see that auth header is actually here. So we probably better now change our assertion to actually look for this one. So it has a header called mini auth. In this case, I'm using small caps because these header values are automatically being looked up in case insensitive ways. So the small caps will work. So this assertion tests that the header is actually there. So let's remove those comments because they're no longer fair. And then the final part is that we're actually going to validate that the value that's in the header is actually the password that we pass in. So we must make sure that we actually pass in the same value that we get from our client into the request to the backend. And I think we should be getting to a point where it might actually succeed. So let's give that a try again. And here we can see that it actually does succeed. There it goes.
That's cool. All right, so reiterate. So we showed you how you can mock basically different responses in different requests for your plugin, and you can inject different values into schema of the plugin, right? So in this case, we we use like a test1.com as a mock route for a valid result.
Yeah, and what I personally find one of the nice things is that it keeps everything quite close together, like the mock setup and the test. They essentially belong together because they are one coherent piece of data. One doesn't work without the other, and if you exchange one without the other, then everything will fail. So here's a coherent piece. Everything stays together, and you can both the mock data that you define as well as the test that you do are in the same place. So you always make sure that it works wherever you run them. It's not depending on the environment.
I think this is where we're gonna press the pause, and we're gonna okay. So let's see, hide the comments. Yep.
Yep.
So folks, now you have the idea how you can implement the plugin. You can always ask the questions either in the forum. You can ask the questions in GitHub discussions for this hackathon, or reach out to me directly, and I will point you to the right place, and leave the comments in this video if you think this was useful. At least it was definitely useful for me also, because I know a little bit more about this framework that we use in the testing and the writing these things. I think with the off process PDKs, you can stay with the frameworks that work for you in your languages of choice. You can use whatever libraries. Here is more kind of like a more opinionated, and more everything is close together, more integrated. So you have a choice to do this, and I really appreciate that Thijs found the time and joined me to this live stream today. Learn a lot.
One thing, Victor.
Yeah.
Would it be? We're way over time. I know. Would it be spending a couple of words on distribution of plugins?
Yeah.
Would it be worthwhile, or would it be a follow-up topic? I mean,
I think it's good if you can talk a little bit about this as well, because one of the things that we really want people to when they will be submitting their hackathon results, this thing needs to be available somehow, and for easier testing things and like play around the things, it would be great to tell them like, okay, so you're done, you did your development. Let's talk about how you distribute the plugins. Do you need a vector screen?
Yeah, please do.
Just move your window. Yep, exactly.
So here we saw in how we write the test, we updated the unit test, we updated the integration test to actually test the full flow. Now, once you have everything done, then there's of course the question like, okay, how am I going to get this thing out there and actually get it into my image where I actually can run it?
This is a very good question, because many times people asking how I can run this, for example, in Kubernetes and some other places, right? So
yeah, and if you look at in the file, let me just close this one. If you look in the file tree here, we already discussed the rock spec. The rock spec is like a manifest file. It determines what files you want to distribute and how Lua Rocks, which is the package manager, should build it. We go quickly back to the rock spec file, which is here. We can see here there's some overhead here that defines names, etc., locations for the Git repo. But here is, especially for Lua, if it's just Lua, if there's nothing else, no C code that needs to be compiled, just Lua files, then this is the essence of what it does. It just grabs the two files, the handler and the schema. In this case, we have variables in here for the plugin name, but if you have your standard name plugin, you can just make it hard-coded. And these are the two files that you need to distribute. That's all there is. Essentially, that's all there is to it. They need to be in a specific path. So what you see here, Kong/plugins/plugin name/handler and schema.lua. And that's where they need to be. So if you're running your stuff on a VM, it would be enough if you just place those files among the Kong distribution files within the plugin folder. If you go into a Pongo shell, here we can see Lua Rocks, and Lua Rocks will give us a location user local, which is the system one. So local and /share /lua/5.1 probably. And here we see all the Lua files that have been installed, and among them there is going to be Kong. Here's Kong.
Inside inside this folder we'll have plugin directory.
If we look into the exact same folder structure, Kong/plugins, basically you would immediately recognize like all the plugin names that we have from the other things. If I would go to, can I do this? Yeah, we can do this cd/Kong/plugin. This is where this Kong/plugin folder is the mount to the host. So this is the same folder with where your plugin resides.
Yeah. So in this case, it will go to Kong.
Yeah. So this is the same folder. The one that you see here in Kong/plugin is the same one that we see here on the left with this contents, Kong/plugin-mini-auth. It's the same folder. If I want to install the plugin, I can do a Lua Rocks make. Lua Rocks will grab the files according to the rock spec and install them. And if I now do another check here, I should see mini-auth, because mini-auth is now installed. And if I look in there, I should probably see my handler.lua and my schema.lua. So if you want to distribute, the core of it is get those files in the right place, and then you can use them. You still have to configure Kong. You have to tell Kong like also load this plugin. Besides the bundled plugins, you need to load this one. But this is the core of it. Now the question is, what's the easiest way to get those files in their destination? If you're doing a VM, you can just use a Lua Rocks install command. I just used Lua Rocks pack, a Lua Rocks make. That's what you do from the source repository, and it will install the rock spec that it finds here. If I would exit, if I want to distribute it and I want to pack it into a package, I can use Pongo again, and I can do a Pongo pack. Pongo pack will use under the hood, it will start a container, build everything, and under the hood it will use Lua rocks again to pack it. If I now go along this, I can see that there's a rocks pack, but there's also an actual rock file. And this
So
rock file
is a zip file, something like that?
That is technically, it is a zip file. You can unzip it, and then you will find the contents of the repository in there. It has everything in there, and this rock file is the only thing you need to distribute, because you can install that file from pretty much anywhere. So if I go into the Pongo shell again, so ls/kong-plugin/Lua rocks install /kong-plugin/ not this one,
yeah.
this one. If I tell it to install that one, it will just install that rock without having to grab for source repositories, whatever. It's a zip file, it has everything in there. So that is the file that you would want to distribute probably. And then let Lua rocks do the heavy lifting of making sure that the files actually end up in the right place in the file system. This is easy if you have a VM. Now, typical installations we see these days is Docker based. Kubernetes is obviously it's all around. With Kubernetes, there's and Docker, there's essentially two options. Option one is use a config map that maps external files into the container in the right location, which technically does the same thing as that we said before, just making sure that the files are available in the right location.
Yep.
That's what a config map does. It's easy, simple to get started, but if you have more than one plugin, it can get unwieldy. If you have 4, 5, 6, we have customers with like dozens of custom plugins, that becomes very hard to manage. At the same time, a drawback of that one also is that Docker containers are intended to run the exact same code everywhere. And by mapping the files into a Docker container, you're actually changing the executing behavior of the Docker container.
Right.
So it's a bit hypothetical, but at the same time, it goes a bit against the nature of Docker containers.
So essentially, I think that would be a good idea to build an image that has bundle plugin, right? So in this case,
exactly.
extend Kong.
That's the other option. Yeah, that's the other option. And for that purpose, we also have a tool, which is if we go into let me open a new one. We have a Docker repository, Docker Kong, which holds the Docker files that we use to create our Docker images. But in this repository, there's also a customize directory, and this has some instructions to take
how to build this.
Yeah, you take an existing Kong image, you specify the plugins you want, and then it builds for you a new image. You just use a Docker build command with some arguments, and it creates a new image which has the plugins injected. And then you can just distribute that image like any other Kong image. And if you start it, all the plugins will be there, they will be enabled, and in the right place.
And
this will be the approach where you create like the golden image with
and with this approach, you just simply, like when you need to update the Kong, you just need to go and change the base image, and the rest of the CI/CD pipeline will be the same kind of.
Exactly. Yes.
So
yes,
just to summarize,
there is, however, there is a drawback to this one as well, because also here, if you have one plugin, it's not that big a deal. But if you have 10 plugins, make it even, like say you have 3 plugins, it means that you create an image that is depending on 4 versions. There's 1 Kong version, 3 plugin versions. Now, how do you version the resulting image of those 4 going out. There's 4 artifacts going in. There's 1 coming out. How do you properly version that final image? And that definitely takes some
thinking.
takes
This is
some
something
yeah, it
that
definitely takes
needs
some
to be,
thinking to do
yeah.
that right. Yeah,
So
it's a difficult problem to solve, but yeah.
it is, but it's kind of a customized thing, and it's whatever organizational versioning strategy you use. Probably it's different organizations will have a different, the way how they can version the things.
Yeah,
Maybe they have a kind of like an umbrella version for all the custom plugins. If they update one plugin, they need to update other plugins as well if they work together and things like that. So um, yeah, so and we cannot solve this problem for you as a vendor. We have our own kind of like strategies how we can do this, and I think
yeah,
the consistent versioning is always a interesting task to tackle and work with. So, folks, I seriously don't know if we can, we show you whole life cycle, install the tooling, the copy template, play around with the tools, play around with the tests, invoke external service. I think that was super helpful and super informative stream today, and I'm super. I couldn't do this alone without Thijs. Obviously, the thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you had a good time. We didn't have like much of the questions, but I expect many people to watch this recording and provide the questions in the comments, and we will get back with some of the new episodes of Kong
yep,
Builders maybe next week. Next week, join us. We will maybe we will talk about API ops and some of the automations around like how to use Kong in the bigger sense. Now, there's no uh, there's no reason for you to not to play around with the hackathon and not build something cool. Thijs, thank you so much for being part of Kong Builders. With this,
thanks for
I
having me.
think
Most
it
welcome.
always a pleasure. Always a pleasure to have you. And with this, as always, my name is Viktor Gamov, and have a nice day.